Okay. Can you hear me now? Is this a little bit better? All right. Thank you. Before I introduce our next speaker, Dr. Motl, he's going to give his presentation, and then we're going to open up for questions. And so we'll have staff walking around with a microphone. So just raise your hand, and we'll come to you, and you'll be able to ask your question. So Dr. Motl, he's the Associate Professor in the Department of Kinesiology, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He earned his PhD in exercise science at the University of Georgia, who's currently playing right now, if you didn't know, in football. So, go Bulldogs. Oh, or they just lost, I'm sorry. Not to bring it up. And he completed his postdoctoral fellowship there in neuroscience. His research focuses on physical activity in people with neurological diseases such as MS. He serves on the Clinical Advisory Committee of the Greater Illinois Chapter, as well as on a peer review panel for clinical research grants. He has recently received National MS Society grants funded through the Illinois State Lottery Fund. And here's Dr. Motl.
Is this loud enough? Good. I generally don't need a microphone to be heard. So can we have a moment of silence since Georgia just lost? So what I thought I would talk with you about today is a little bit about exercise, physical activity in persons with MS. And I made the title kind of catchy. We know physical activity and exercise are good for people with MS. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But what we're really working on right now is to understand how to get people with MS to engage in more physical activity. And once they start engaging in physical activity, how do we get them to stick with physical activity? Okay? Now, one thing I want to talk about, if I can for a second, is in the keynote session, there was this comment about exercise-induced hypoxia of the brain. There's no such thing. The brain is a protected organ. During exercise, the body works very, very hard to make sure blood flow to the brain is maintained, if not increased. It doesn't decrease. Because if it did, that would mean that your brain is getting starved of oxygen delivery during exercise. And that wouldn't be a good thing now, would it? So I just wanted to point that out before I start. So the paradox. We're going to talk about a paradox. We know that physical activity and exercise training are quite good for people with MS. This book, I actually made this title myself. This is actually a book called Multiple Sclerosis, The History of a Disease by Jacques Murray, and I added the physical activity and multiple sclerosis part. And the reason I did that is when I read this book, and this is a book that's about 500 pages long, and I was quite interested in reading it, I was amazed. From the very early parts of multiple sclerosis and the clinical care of individuals with MS, neurologists and physicians were prescribing exercise training for persons with MS for a number of reasons, but one of the most important reasons was to make sure that people maintain their capacity to ambulate and to walk normally. They were also prescribing it for treating probably what we would call nowadays a mood disorder, such as major depressive disorder, as well as for improving cognitions and things along those lines. So from the very beginning, exercise and physical activity has been something that's prescribed for persons with MS. There was a period of time in which people thought that physical activity exercise might actually be somewhat dangerous for people with MS, that it might be fatiguing and that it might compromise the actual disease itself. Well, I think the good news is that we've moved far beyond that stage. These are data, and this is some information from a review article that I wrote with my colleague Lara Paludi, who's over here. Lara, raise your hand. We wrote this. We were invited to write this for the journal Nature. They contacted us to write about exercise in people with MS for Nature. And they asked us to write this article. And what we did is we looked at all the literature on physical activity behavior, that is whether or not people were engaging in supervised structured exercise training, or physical activity behavior as part of their life, such as walking around during their daily existence. And we wanted to know all the way from the pathogenic processes that are involved in MS, such as inflammation or neurodegenerative processes, all the way through community participation. What are the benefits of engaging in exercise training and physical activity for persons with multiple sclerosis? And what we found, I think the good news is that at every stage of this model and this kind of framework that we invoked, there's benefits. Individuals who are more physically active have a better inflammatory profile with MS. They have a better neurotrophic profile, so they produce more of these cells that are important for promoting brain health. That's an important thing. They have less axonal damage and less axonal loss. They have better neuronal status. All the way through, they have better functions such as fatigue, depression, aerobic power, gait, muscle strength, and balance. So these are all things that we know that exercise is quite good for. The one caveat to this is that most of this literature is for individuals who have mild to moderate degrees of disability. The one area where we don't know as much about is individuals who have more severe burden of multiple sclerosis, such as individuals who would walk with a rollator, something along these lines, or individuals who are in a wheelchair or other mobility device. And that's what Lara, we brought her to the University of Illinois and to the great state of Illinois to address that problem. So that's what she's going to do over the next 20 years. She didn't know that she signed on for a 20-year commitment, but she did. Now she's accepted it. Okay, so we know that physical activity is good, but the problem is that we have low levels of physical activity in persons with MS. This is. I hate it when pictures of my son show up in presentations. But you know, people with MS are no different than the general population in many regards. That is, we oftentimes choose to do things that are pleasurable, that are sedentary. The general population does that. People with MS do that. But there's something more than just that that's going on in MS. And these are data from one of my graduate students, and I work with some unbelievable graduate students at the University of Illinois. I just want to point that out. And these are data from one of my graduate students, Brian Sandroff, where he looked at the levels of physical activity in persons with MS. And the end of the day story is, no matter how we measured physical activity using the most expensive, intricate measures, or just using self-report questionnaires, persons with MS were less physically active than the general population. Now the question is that unexpected? No, I don't think so. But is that potentially a problem? And I think it is, because the general population is quite inactive, and generally speaking, persons with MS are even less active, putting them at risks for comorbidities and other problems. And so to make matters potentially even worse, we published something that might even be scary. And these are data from a study that was published by the National MS Society that was a 5-year study where we followed about 300 people with MS over a 30-month period of time to measure their physical activity behavior. And the point of this slide is that not only are people with MS less physically active, but the physical activity levels are constantly decreasing over time. And one of the most interesting parts of this study is that the decrease in physical activity over time has nothing to do with the things that we think it has to do with, such as symptomology like severe fatigue, or depression, or pain, or other common manifestations of MS. So people with MS are less physically active, and their physical activity behavior is decreasing over time. And I'm starting to make you guys depressed, I feel. So that's where we stepped in. My background is in neuroscience and in behavioral science. So trying to study how to get people to change and stick with change in their physical activity behaviors. So this is where we're going. There's a paradox here. We know that physical activity is good, right? But on the other side, we know that people with MS, generally speaking, not everybody, but generally speaking, are not getting enough physical activity and it's decreasing over time. It's good, but we're not doing it. Well, there's got to be a lesson in here to learn, right? We have to figure out what the lesson is. I think we're on the path. Perhaps we should be learning from our observations, and I think it might be time for a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is a fancy word for saying we need to rethink about what we're trying to get people with MS to do. I think trying to get people with MS to engage in structured, planned, repetitive exercise in a gymnasium is okay, but if we only focus on that, we're going to continue to beat our heads against the wall because that's not accessible to everybody with MS, is it? And that's not what everybody with MS wants to do. Let's be quite honest. So we need to rethink the way we look at this problem. And that's where we talk about a paradigm shift. We need to move beyond exercise, physical activity that's put forth within structured, supervised settings. This quite simply isn't answering the question and solving the problem. We need to maybe think about focusing on lifestyle physical activity. That is, accumulating physical activity in the context of our everyday life, how we go about living our everyday life. And can we do this? Well, we do this, and I'm going to talk about this, through what are called behavioral interventions. Behavioral interventions is a very fancy way for saying that we're going to teach you skills, techniques, strategies to identify opportunities in every single day of your life to find physical activity and to accumulate physical activity. And this is the way the world is moving. So we have to go away. We've all seen this cartoon before. I'm looking for my quarter I dropped. Did you drop it here? No, I dropped it 2 blocks down the street. Then why are you looking for it here? Because the light is better here. We can't continue to do the easy thing, which is to say do more exercise in the gymnasium. We know it's good for you. We've looked in that spot, but that hasn't given us the answer. We have to go to a different area and think about this differently. This paradigm is no different in MS as it's been identified in the general population. So a good friend of mine, Andrea Dunn, made this same observation. The majority of U.S. adults are inadequately active. And if people start an exercise program, my former doctoral advisor noticed that 50% of them drop out in 3 months. When you get to 6 months, 75% of people drop out. When you get to a year, it's almost everybody has quit an exercise program. So she has suggested, and I'm borrowing from Andrea Dunn, I want to give her full credit, that we need to look at the data a little bit differently. Instead of thinking about people have to do high-intensity, structured exercise, she says that maybe moderate amounts of physical activity are enough. Low to moderate amounts of physical activity are enough. And there actually are a lot of data to show that even doing light physical activity has benefits for people. And she suggests that we also need to think about whether or not it needs to be intermittent or continuous. So the idea that most people have is you go to the gym and you exercise for 30 continuous minutes. Have you heard that before? Well, what we know from science is that you can actually accumulate 30 minutes in 6 5-minute bouts over the course of your day, and it's equally as beneficial as doing it all at once. Why does that matter? Why is that important? Well, if you try to do 30 minutes and it wears you out and it tires you and exhausts you, are you going to come back to it? No. But if you can do 5 minutes, an hour later, do 5 more minutes, a couple hours later, do 5 more minutes, does that sound a little bit more palatable to the world around us? Can we accumulate that in the course of our daily life, such as at work? Lara will tell you, I'm not a regular exerciser, but I get up and walk 5 minutes out of every hour that I'm at work. Over the course of the day, don't make a determination of how many hours I work. I get an hour of physical activity. I'm exceeding public health recommendations for physical activity just by getting up from my desk and walking around for 5 minutes. And that's what we're talking about in this paradigmatic shift. Lifestyle physical activity. The accumulation. Accumulation means gathering over the course of the day, right? Not all at once. Gathering over the course of the day, 30 minutes of something that is moderate in intensity. It might make you breathe a little bit by the time you're done being physically active. Okay? And we want it in self-selected. We don't want to prescribe this. I don't want you to think that you're being told exactly what to do. Instead, we view this as you get to self-select the opportunities that exist in life to accumulate this physical activity. This can be done in leisure, so in our free time. We have a lot of free time, right? We used to have a lot more free time, and that was generally something that Americans had a lot of. Now we work too much. But nevertheless, during leisure, free time pursuits are occupations, if we work, household chores, vacuuming, sweeping. That falls into this lifestyle physical activity definition. Transportation. So we've done a lot of these behavioral interventions of people with MS, and we've heard these amazing stories. People saying, I take the bus to work. And what I've decided to do is each week I get off one stop earlier. Transportational physical activity. Walking the rest of the way to get to your job. They're self-selected rather than prescribed. Why is that important? That's self-empowering if you get to choose, isn't it? It's planned or unplanned. So you can try to put this in your schedule, or you can look for unplanned opportunities, kind of opportunistic opportunities during one's day to seize the moment, so to speak, to find physical activity. And it can be accumulated. So this is what we're suggesting is we need a paradigm shift. We need to stop thinking about only structured exercise training and start thinking about lifestyle physical activity that can be accumulated. This can be done through behavioral interventions that target sedentary people. People who are not accumulating enough physical activity and teaching them to seek opportunities to do more physical activity. So for example, reduce the amount of time that you spend watching the television. Is there really anything that good on TV anyway? Reducing the amount of time that we spend on Facebook. A lot of people spend a lot of time on Facebook. My students do it in class. It's as though they can't wait 15 minutes. Lecture starts, laptop opens, Facebook's up. Then they get busted. But the point is that if we did a time audit of our day, I think we can all identify periods in time of our day that we may not be as productive, that we might be able to put this into, that's sedentary and become more active. The beauty of this is, focused exercise training studies are very small scale. We might be able to enroll 20 or 30 people into one of these types of trials and studies. If we do that for people with MS, only 20 to 30 people can really benefit from a very expensive program. If we focus on lifestyle physical activity, we can develop programs that can be disseminated quite broadly to large numbers of individuals and essentially have such a large effect. There are cost-effective modes of delivery. Instead of going to an exercise gym that costs money, we can deliver this in the context of your own house through the internet. Everybody has a smartphone nowadays. We can deliver this through smartphones. We can deliver it across a lot of different people, and there are beneficial consequences. So, we have to start doing things the right way. I actually took this picture when I was in Ireland. I love it. I don't know how to say that, but I know how to say burn fat, not oil, and they're suggesting that we ride a bike as opposed to driving a car. But that's what lifestyle physical activity is all about. It's the physical activity is moved out of the structured environment and accumulated throughout daily lifestyle choices. Riding a bike, things like that. So, this type of physical activity, we've established a lot of data that this type of physical activity is good for people with MS. But the question is that if we want to pursue this new directive, if we want to do this, we need to know, well, how do we do it? Michael's been very helpful in helping us understand how to do this type of physical activity and these types of interventions. So we have to understand, how do people change? And that's a very challenging thing to do, to understand what it is that gets people to start thinking about changing, to make the decision to change, and once they start that change, how to sustain that change over a long period of time. But that's what we're talking about. So we've been working very hard in this area right here to understand what to do. And all of this is based on theory. I hate talking about theory to you guys, but the important thing that I want you guys to think about, and the reason I bring up theory is because theory is like a roadmap. Theory is a roadmap that tells us exactly how to get from point A to point B and all the turns along the way. So we've gone to theory to understand what are the variables that we should target that initiate change. And good theories tell us not only what variables, but how to change them. Okay? And the theory that we've used is from my father. That's Albert Bandura. Anybody know who Albert Bandura is? So Albert Bandura was the guy who did research at Stanford University on Bobo dolls. And what he did is, he would put an adult in a room with a Bobo doll, a life-size doll. And these adults would kick it and punch it, men or women, whatever, knock it down to the ground. And he had children watch this. And then the children went in the room. What do you think the children did? They kicked it, punched it. And they did this for both boys and girls. You know who had the biggest smiles on their face? The girls. It was amazing. You look at these pictures. But the point of this is that a lot of what we learn is through observation. Through observation of other individuals. And then the key ingredient is reinforcement. So if a child does something and they're not reinforced for it, they won't repeat it again. But if they're reinforced for it, now they've learned a new behavior. Well, his theory, the theory that we use, came out of these early experiences of teaching children how to be violent or understanding why they are violent. And he tells us that ultimately our behaviors, every action we do, is governed by some very simple things. The first being our confidence in engaging in a behavior. If you're not confident that you can engage in a behavior or change around your behavior, then it's very unlikely that you will actually do the behavior. Okay? So this was one of the primary things that he told us we should know about when we're trying to get people to change, is how confident are they in their ability to change. The second thing he told us is that people have beliefs about whether or not they should change and why that change may or may not be important. So people have to have a reason to change. They have to perceive that change, first of all, is an important thing for them because maybe there's some threat. But secondly, that people have to believe that there's some benefit to doing it. That changing their behavior results in something important, whether that be physical, such as losing a few pounds or gaining a couple of inches of muscle. Whether it is social, that is, I am physically active and I develop relationships with other individuals. David and I have developed good relationship over time through exercise. A social, and then self-evaluative. exercising and feeling good about oneself, having positive mental health, things along those lines. Those are all really important benefits of engaging in physical activity, and people have to understand whether or not those will occur for them and whether or not those things are important. Then we also need to understand the things that promote behavior change, such as learning strategies, like writing in our calendar, today's a great day to get some physical activity, and planning it in at lunchtime or things along those lines, but also understanding impediments, things that get in our way, and developing plans to promote facilitators and overcome impediments. And lastly, goals. Goals. We are, by our very nature, goal-directed people. That is, we are individuals who like to set a standard that we strive for. And why is that so important? If we set a good standard and an achievable standard, and we strive for it and we meet that standard, how does that make us feel? It makes us feel good. And so he tells us that we need to target all of these things to change around people's behavior. So we wanted to know, what is any of this silliness here? It looks a lot more like spaghetti and weird diagrams. Does it actually work for explaining why some people with MS are physically active or not? So one of my graduate students, Yujin Su, did a study, and her first study said, well, yeah, this seems to work. Then she did a second study, and what's most important about this second study is that it followed people over a long period of time. And she was studying how people change over a long period of time and trying to understand if this behavior not only describes why some people are physically active and others are not, but why some people become more physically active over time and why some individuals become less physically active. And she showed that this theory does a nice job of explaining that. So what have we done? We've developed programs and interventions around this theory. So this is the first intervention we did where we designed an internet website. And this internet website was developed by me. And I'm not a programmer. I'm not a programmer. So it was a struggle. I had to learn HTML and all these other languages and learn how to program in a thing called Drupal. But we developed an internet website that was interactive, that engaged people in the material, and that taught them these behavior change principles over time. And we rolled this out very slowly. And on top of teaching people these behavior change principles, we also had online chat sessions where other people with MS could get online and ask each other questions and dialogue and interact. And then on top of that, we had these forums where people could post a question and other people with MS could post answers to it. And then thirdly, we developed a DVD at one point in time for people with MS about engaging in exercise. And we took snippets of this DVD. It was about a woman named Mary and her experiences with exercise and physical activity, and put it in this website. And this was all based on trying to teach people skills, give them resources, give them motivation to become more physically active. And so the long and short story is, in this first study, the intervention group increased their physical activity over a 3-month period of time. The control group didn't. So it suggested to us that maybe we have a little bit of signal in this world, that maybe our intervention and our new approach to changing physical activity behavior might be working a little bit. But it was a simple study. I funded it out of my own lab resources, and we didn't have a lot of support for it at first, because people looked at us cross-eyed when we said, we're going for a new approach in MS. So one of my graduate students, Dee Degonsky, then said, well, I want to replicate this study. But on top of replicating it, I want to know if after we teach these people the skills, techniques that they need to be more physically active, whether when we take the website away from them, does that behavior change last? So did we produce a permanent behavior change or a relatively permanent behavior change in these people? Were we successful in teaching them? And these are the data right here that matter. So from before to after the 3-month period, we got the intervention group to increase their physical activity. The control group did not change their physical activity. We then took the intervention away, and what happened? The intervention group sustained their behavior. Not only could we get them to become more physically active by teaching them the skills and techniques that we needed, we could get them to sustain this behavior change. Why does that matter? Well, usually if you take away an exercise program, what's going to happen to someone? They're going to stop exercising. We took this internet website away, and what happened to these people? They stayed physically active. So, now we're feeling pretty good. We're excited. So we thought, okay, next step. The MS Society gave us some money to do a larger trial. And this is a paper that's just published recently by Dr. Paludi in the journal Multiple Sclerosis. And they gave us money to do a 6-month program. And they wanted to know, can we change physical activity behavior over a longer period of time? Not just 3 months, but 6 months. But on top of that, are there meaningful benefits for persons with MS? Not only are we changing their physical activity behavior, but are things like their fatigue and the severity of the fatigue decreasing? Are there symptoms of depression decreasing? Is pain going down? Is sleep improving, particularly sleep quality? We don't know a lot about managing sleep problems in MS, do we? And so what we showed in this study is that this physical activity intervention can increase physical activity behavior in people with MS compared to a control. But what was more important is we saw that there was a greater reduction in fatigue in the intervention condition. There was a greater reduction in depression and anxiety. These individuals had less pain, and they were reporting better sleep quality. And on top of that, they were reporting a higher quality of life. So now we're really feeling good about ourselves. Right? It's working. We're changing behavior. We're sustaining the behavior change. And on top of that, we're showing symptomatic benefits. Well, we have a paper right now that's under review from the same study where we looked at cognitive function in the same group. I know many of you were just in this session on cognitive function beforehand. And we used the simple digit modality test. Is that a good measure of cognitive function in MS? Did you talk about the simple digit modality test? All right, great. Or you don't remember. So the simple digit modality test is one of the most common and well accepted measures of cognitive function in persons with MS. And it's been shown on this scale, if you can get a 4-point change on the scale, that's considered large enough to help people go back to work. Is that an important thing? And what we showed with this intervention is we got a 6-point change in cognitive functioning with this intervention. The symbol digit modalities test. Symbol digit modalities. It's often called the SDMT. We got a 6-point change in this test. We didn't put anybody back to work. We didn't measure that. But is this meaningful? The data would suggest that it's quite a meaningful perspective. Okay? It's quite a meaningful change for persons with MS. So I think this paradigm shift, we can change this type of behavior and we can get meaningful outcomes of this type of behavior. And I'm going to skip that and go to the conclusion. We can change people's physical activity behavior, including people with MS. We can teach them how to do it. And we can change around the way we approach this type of behavior change. This reflects a new kind of shift in people with MS. Most of the people who are doing this type of work in rehabilitation are only focusing on structured, planned, repetitive exercise behavior. It's theory-based, and it has consequences. And this type of approach, the beauty of it is, it can be integrated into clinical practice. That is, if we have this website up and ready to go, when you go see your clinician, they can help you get access to this type of tool and medium for long-term behavior change. And it might even work on top of prescriptive exercise training. But there are some still issues. We still have a lot of work to do, and we have some very important questions to do. We want to know more about the consequences of this type of physical activity. In fact, we want to know what is this doing to the structure and function of the central nervous system as well as immune function in persons with MS. We have a long history of research on the University of Illinois campus showing that physical activity and exercise interventions are effective for improving the structure and function of the brain tissue, particularly the hippocampus, as our keynote speaker brought about today. Well, this is in older adults. We want to know if the same thing happens in persons with MS. If it does, this is a powerful behavior change, and we're doing that. We want to know if this approach is acceptable across levels of impairment or disease courses. So the National MS Society funded us to develop a similar type intervention for people who use wheelchairs and scooters with persons with MS, who have MS. So we're designing the same type of intervention. We had to get really creative and think long and hard about doing it. And giving the same type of approach to a group of individuals who most people told us we couldn't get any change out of. And we are seeing significant changes in their daily physical activity accumulated through rolling their wheelchair. So we think it's acceptable. Can this behavior be sustained long term? So we've shown 3-month benefits. Well, we want to know, does this last for 6 months, a year, a lifetime? Because if we teach someone the skills, we can teach them how to maintain this behavior long term. It's kind of the old adage, if I catch a fish, I feed you for a day. If I teach you to fish, I feed you for a lifetime. And that's the motto that we take with this. Is this enough, or should it be paired with supervised exercise? One of the things that we don't know a lot about is how this lifestyle physical activity program interacts with disease-modifying therapies or other emerging agents. And the last thing that we're starting to do is we're starting to examine the effect of lifestyle physical activity in mice. So there are nice animal models of MS. And you can actually try to get mice to be more physically active. Well, how do you do that? You don't want to put them on a treadmill. That's actually the wrong thing to do. You put a wheel in their cage. And it turns out that mice, if you give them a wheel, love to run. They love to run versus not giving them a wheel, and they don't run as much. We actually have a gentleman on our campus who developed a marathon mouse who runs upwards of 20 kilometers a day through genetic engineering. But the point of this is that if we move this into the mice, we can get at actual cellular changes to try to understand at a very basic level why we see these benefits happening. So we've partnered with Steve Miller at Northwestern University to start doing animal work on lifestyle physical activity in the animal model of MS to try to understand at the cellular level why are we getting these benefits. So the last thing I'll say is, this is not my dad. But we have a lot of new opportunities going on at the University of Illinois that are all funded by the National MS Society. And these are just a small number of them. We're right now working on a study called Get Fit with MS, which is a home-based physical activity exercise program. It's for individuals who are about 50 years of age or younger. We have another program that just got funded by the MS Society that's called Flextoba MS. This is a DVD-delivered exercise program for persons with MS who are 50 years of age and older. And we developed this DVD program through a grant from the National Institutes of Health that cost about $3 million. And we've shown that this improves physical function, clinically significant improvements in physical function in older adults. Well, the National MS Society has just given us a little bit of money to see if the same thing might occur in people with MS. The good news is we've already developed the DVDs. Now they're free. Now we get to use them in research. So this is for individuals who are 50 years of age and older with MS. Katsu and Therastride are two forms of exercise that are somewhat novel in people with MS. Katsu is based on the premise that some individuals with MS have developed a significant amount of leg weakness. or muscle weakness. And so if you developed a significant amount of muscle weakness, you might not be able to lift enough weight to generate adaptations. And what KAATSU does is it puts a pressure cuff around your leg. And we pump it up to about 160 millimeters of mercury while you're doing resistance training. And we have you do very, very, very light resistance training. And this type of exercise seems to stimulate super high intensity resistance training. So the MS Society wants to know. We have some pilot data that we think it works. They want to know, is this a new alternate form of exercise for people with MS who have significant weakness? TheraStride is simply body weight supported treadmill training where we have a special treadmill. We hoist people above the treadmill who can't walk, supporting their whole body weight, and try to retrain their central nervous system to teach them how to walk again. The home study is a study that's being done up at University of Illinois Chicago with my colleague Bo Fernhall. This is a study looking at physical activity exercise in persons with MS and trying to understand its effects on arterial structure and function. And you might think, well, why are we worried about the arteries and the cardiovascular system? Well, it turns out that cardiovascular dysfunction in MS is a significant influence on disability progression in people with MS. These are data out of Canada. And so our ideas are, well, let's see if we can reduce cardiovascular dysfunction and improve other outcomes. And WHAM, I don't know what WHAM stands for, but it's one of my colleagues' studies that's looking at promoting physical activity in wheelchair users with MS. So with that said, I do want to just mention some acknowledgments. We've been particularly blessed over the years to have a lot of people from the great state of Illinois who have multiple sclerosis participate in our research. And none of what we're interested in or what we can do to try to help with restoring function in people with MS could be done without all of these participants. So we're always indebted to our participants. I work with some unbelievable undergraduates at the University of Illinois, so wicked smart. I work with just great graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, and colleagues. And this is a picture of some of the people who I work with. And we've had a lot of funding, particular funding from the National MS Society and National Institutes of Health over time to support this kind of research. So with that, I will say I'm done. I will take a lot of questions. This is my contact information. This is our website. This is my office phone number. Not my project coordinator's phone number. So I'll take questions. Do you want a handout?
Oh, I don't need this. Okay.
And some questions I might defer to Lara because she's a lot smarter than I am.
Are you based out of Champaign?
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Let me see if I can get that back up. I'll get it back there. So we are based out of Champaign, at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Yeah, and so that's a good point. So some of our studies don't actually involve having to come into the laboratory. We do a lot of things through the internet. We do things through the mail. We do things over the phone. We try to create opportunities that can advance our understanding and science from a variety of different perspectives so we can get as many people as possible involved. So thank you for reminding me of that. I appreciate that. Hold on for a second. I think, yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering, where do we get the DVDs if they're available?
Well, first we have to test them to make sure they work. So send me an email at robmotl@illinois.edu. We're starting up the study. We just got funding October 1st. We are starting the study. We should start, the project coordinator will start recruitment for it in the next week or two. So if you send me an email, I'll forward your information along to her. Her name is Ruth Sosnoff Franklin, and she'll be in touch with you. But we can't release the DVD until we know it works. We don't want to just give it out without knowing that it works for people with MS. We think it will, but, Okay. Yes.
I may have missed this information, but what was it about your 3-month study online that changed the behavior of those people and helped them sustain that lifestyle change?
That's a very good question. So we don't know the specific answer to that question. But what we did is we taught people self-regulatory skills. That is, skills on how to regulate their behavior every single day of their life. So things like self-monitoring, wearing a pedometer, and looking at what your steps are on a daily basis. And making sure that if you have a target goal for that day, you're getting there. And so we get people telling us stories like, I check it all day long, or I'll check it at lunchtime, or I'll check it at the end of the day, and then trying to, from there, figure out the solution to getting to their goal. So a lot of it has to do with self-monitoring, self-planning, and goal setting and things like that is my best guess at why it worked. I don't know. I mean, we had the online community. In the later studies, we actually added one-on-one video chats where we tried to be supportive of individuals. I don't know which of those things, and we tried to encourage people. So, for example, we might encourage you to find a friend to go be physically active with and try to do it that way. So that's another strategy or behavioral approach to do that. We haven't figured out why it works yet. We just are trying to figure out if it works. And so, yeah, and I mean, wear a pedometer for a day, and I did it one day, and I got done at the end of the day, and I start my day at 4 a.m, and I got home at 6 o'clock, and I looked at my pedometer one day, and I had 3,000 steps. I went and grabbed my kids, and we went for a long walk. Yeah, I don't want to give out a daily goal because I don't think that, a lot of people in this world focus on this goal of 10,000 steps a day. There's actually no scientific evidence behind 10,000 steps a day. So I think what's important to do is to wear the pedometer and figure out what you look like on a daily basis. And then set something reasonable, like over the next 3 months, I want to add another 1,000 steps to my daily physical activity behavior. And I'm going to look for opportunities to do that. I think that's a better approach than giving someone a normative kind of, here's what everybody should do. Yeah.
Keep going, Becker.
Yes.
Thank you. And when you were talking about an online kind of program, you said, and if you're interested in something like this, you could talk to your doctor and he can help you get, involved in something like this. How do we go about doing that? I mean, my doctor doesn't know about this program.
Well, that's a whole other issue, isn't it? What do our physicians and neurologists know about physical activity and how to prescribe physical activity and how to encourage physical activity? And so the ultimate goal is to develop something like this that we can give to physicians as a resource, but we're not quite there yet. We actually are waiting to hear back from a grant for a 5-year trial to test this in large numbers of individuals. So the ultimate goal is something like this could be integrated into clinical practice. And one of my colleagues is starting to do research to try to understand what is it that patients need from their doctors when they go to their doctors to ask about physical activity, and what do doctors need to help you guys be physically active? Because I think that's a whole other part of this equation. So we're trying to do microphones so everyone can hear. Okay. Yep.
Assuming that there's a rather extensive interconnectivity between the different campuses of the University of Illinois, is there a distinct possibility of creating some sort of transportation between the U of I Chicago and Champaign-Urbana so that people from the north of I-80 area can come down?
Can we go back to science? No, it's a real important pragmatic issue, isn't it? That is, if we're a hub in central Illinois doing a lot of this stuff, and we want to try to get people in Chicagoland to come down and do it, we have some problems. And we're trying to figure out the solution to that problem. One solution is to try to do some of our programs in Chicago. What that requires, though, is for some support to try to find places to do that. And fortunately, today I've had a lot of people come up to me and say, hey, we want to try to figure out how to integrate your research into our center up in Chicago so that people don't have to come all the way down. So I think that's probably the more realistic. But we always, for our research studies, I will say that the project coordinator I work with, Julia Balto, is and she's just amazing. And she will try to find opportunities for carpooling for people in Chicagoland. And nowadays, as long as we have funding for a study, we try to give people transportational money. So we've been able, in some cases, to give people enough money to take the train down and back for the day to be able to participate in things. Do you have any, besides like a bus system, any other ideas?
I just assumed that I know just working in Indiana with Purdue University, they had different shuttles that worked with IUPUI in Indianapolis and stuff like that, and I just wondered if the U of I Chicago would have any sort of shuttle arrangement with the Champaign Band campus.
That'd be awesome. I'll look into it. I think it's a great idea. Because one of the things that we struggle with is finding enough people to do the research that we're funded to do. I mean, I'm indebted to everybody who will volunteer because at the end of the day, we can't even do the little amount of research that we are doing, and we're more ambitious than anybody in the world should be. And so we're always looking for opportunities to facilitate this. So I'll look into it. I'm always trying to look into it. And in fact, that's why we're doing a lot more home-based things.
Question. I've changed. So I'm the guy that when I go to the mall, I park farthest away so I walk closest to the door.
That's lifestyle physical activity.
And all that kind of stuff. So my question is, in your study, do you do kind of a lifestyle questionnaire so that you fill things out and then make suggestions to people based on answers to that questionnaire?
So we don't. So there's two questions I think really embedded in there. The first is, how do we know we're changing lifestyle physical activity? And what we use is we try to use a device called an accelerometer, which is a very, very sophisticated pedometer that not only measures if you take a step, but the amount of intensity of steps and things like that. So it's a good way of objectively measuring physical activity in everyday life. And secondly, so that's how we measure the change that's occurring, is with the accelerometer, as well as self-reports to ask people. The second part is the program is set up to actually talk with you about opportunities. So we have people who will talk with you who are trained to do this and say, let's talk about your daily life and where we might find an opportunity for this. Because without that, I think your point is that how will people really know when the opportunity presents itself? Yeah. Yep. I couldn't agree with you more. And that's the importance of, we can do this over the internet again. We can do it with Skype or the phone, where you have a face-to-face contact where someone is actually paying attention to you and listening to you, and you get that sense. So there's this kind of good social dynamic, and they're working with you one-on-one, and they're very trained to do this. Yeah. So it's a really good point.
Dr. Motl,
yes.
I just finished the 6 months PT study at the UIC. And, they all rave about you, of course. But
they don't know yet.
Oh, okay. But anyways, going to this physical therapy, I didn't have the exercise. I had the weight training, and that was awesome. 3 of the people in my support group were in the exercise program. That's the one I want to try next. But if you go to the UIC, for anybody, if they can get there, it's fantastic. And the physical therapists there are awesome. They will help you. They will show you. And you could also maybe educate them on MS, because sometimes they don't know all the stuff that we know.
Yeah.
That's what I just wanted to let you know.
Well, and I tell you, the people who come to our campus, I have a lot of undergraduates in our lab who want to ultimately be clinicians, physical therapists, doctors, occupational therapists, what have you. And one of the greatest benefits they have is interacting with people with MS. So they get to learn a lot about people who have a condition that they will ultimately be working with at some point in time. So it's a point well taken. So there's...
Thank you. I had a setback about 2 years ago, and I've been pretty sedentary ever since. I have changed my lifestyle now. I walk to and from the bus and the train. So I've done all of that. I've noticed strength come back into my legs. My biggest problem is I have spasms in my entire abdomen. So it affects my balance. It also affects what I can do physically. I would really love to be able to get my heart rate up fast enough that I would be able to burn some calories. I can't move enough. So I don't know, is that something that you're working on as well with people, is specific exercises for people with disabilities and that type of a thing?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing some of looking at people who have different degrees and types of impairments and trying to figure out how to help them engage in more physical activity and exercise and things along those lines. The one thing I would say to you is what we want to kind of try to think about moving away from is this idea that I got to go out and be physically active to where my heart's pumping really hard and I can feel it. Because by definition, the second you're going out and walking, you are engaging fairly large muscles because it involves the legs. And by definition, you're expending calories because you can't move your legs without doing that. So walking in and of itself, just going out and walking requires energy expenditure, and that's one of the best ways to get the energy expenditure. So I would keep doing that. I think that's an important thing to do. I hope that helps.
It does. I hope the water, getting in the pool.
Yeah.
Don't have a lot of mobility.
Yep.
It's fabulous.
Perfect.
Yeah, your enthusiasm is really impressive. It makes us want to go out and do things. But no, I'm really excited about getting the DVD because I want instant results, and it doesn't happen that way. So incorporating my lifestyle would be so much. I mean, I could do things, but I just don't because it doesn't happen immediately. Yeah. So when can we get the DVD? Is it out yet?
No, it's not. Like I was mentioning, send me an email. I'll get you in the trial. That's the fastest way you're going to get access to the DVD because we haven't tested it yet. But let me make a comment about that because I agree. We are a society and we are peoples who want immediate gratification. So when we do something, we want to see something tangible right then and there for it. And one of the things I would encourage you to do is try to look at a way of tangibly seeing that you've done something else, like wearing the pedometer and getting a couple of 100 or 1,000 extra steps, because that is a tangible way of seeing I've done something. The second thing I would encourage you to do is to think not so much about the physical things that happen with exercise, but the psychological things. So, for example, if you're a little deprived of energy and you go engage in physical activity and you feel a sense of an increase in energy afterward, that's an immediate reward for the behavior. That's a salient reinforcement for doing something that's not physical but psychological. Or if you're feeling a little nervous or anxious and you go engage in physical activity and you feel more calm and relaxed. Right? That's an immediate salient reward that reinforces the behavior. And that's what I want people to focus on.
Okay, we have
Does that
time
help?
for one more question.
Hi, I called the office about a trial. I don't remember which one it was, a study that it was for up to age 54.
Yeah.
And then she asked me how old I was, and I told her, and she said, "You're too old." I'm 58.
Yeah.
Now, is the age limits really set like what you say, or is there some leeway? Or
Good question. So I hope whoever you talked to didn't say it that way. You're too old. I will address that tomorrow morning in my lab meeting Monday morning, because that's not the way we work. So in addition to being a faculty member, I also chair what's called the Institutional Review Board at the University of Illinois. And that's the board that oversees all research that involves human subjects. And so the reason I point that out to you is because one of the things that we have to do is make sure whoever's engaging in physical activity is doing so in a safe manner that minimizes risks and maximizes benefits. And so the American College of Sports Medicine has suggested to us that women 55 years of age and men 45 years in age and older, both those groups, are at greater risk of having cardiovascular complications when engaging in physical activity and exercise. So our university has, for a long period of time, mandated that they don't want us doing that research. I've been able to fortunately overcome that. So, for example, this trial that we're talking about with the DVD-based intervention, that is for people specifically who are above those age thresholds so that we can start working with them. So that because that's one of the biggest complaints we get is, I'm told that I'm a little too old. But that's the reason why. And so, I know those ages sound young. I don't necessarily consider 55. I certainly don't consider 45 to be old. Because I'm fast approaching it. But that is where the American College of Sports Medicine has set thresholds. The American Heart Association has set thresholds of risk. And, universities look at risk management, and that's where they've drawn the line. We've recently broke through that line. Well, that's where we're going now, is by moving to a model where we're getting some clearance for individuals, we can start doing that. So it's just been a long work in progress to get our IRB, our Institutional Review Board, which is traditionally very conservative, to become a little bit more liberal in their thinking.
All right. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time. We don't have time for questions. So thank you, Dr. Motl, for that engaging presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And thank you, everybody, for attending today.